and we can send this out. And if anybody wanted to hear this again, or you need to leave early, you could, go ahead. Sarah Lee can send out the recording to everybody. So, but looking forward to seeing you all next week in a little over 4 or 5 days. So is everybody set for arriving on Sunday for Arlington House for dinner?
Yes.
Cool. That's great. So I guess I don't know what the forecast is going to be. I've not checked that part.
I'm keeping an eye on it. There's a chance of rain, but
yeah,
I'm keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, it's like 50%. It's hard, moderate. Yeah, it's a chance of rain up until about 3 p.m., but it's 50%. And that's so far out. It's hard to say what'll happen.
Working on a plan B.
Yeah, but the rest of the week looks pretty good. It's like only a scattered chance of showers on Wednesday and Thursday. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. So, well, great. Well, what we were going to do tonight is I was going to do the Power of Place talk, basically, going over the landscape history of Montpelier and putting the sites you all are going to be working on in context with the site, with all the other sites at Montpelier. So the site we're going to be working on, of course, is the blacksmith shop. I'll go into that in a little more detail in a few minutes, but wanted to put it into the context of the overall history that we've got at Montpelier, from the Madison era all the way into the the National Trust era, and just talk a little bit about preservation. So, but yeah, well, looks like everybody just about is joined, which is great. And are we missing anybody, Sarah Lee?
We're missing Evelyn, who wasn't able to come to the last one too. So I think it's a computer issue.
Okay.
And then the other one who's going to, hello Nancy, is going to be the young man Geyer, who just joined up, and so hopefully he'll be able to make it, but he might not. But I don't.
Okay.
But he will be here Sunday.
All right, sounds good. That's great. That's great. So, yeah, what we'll do is we'll do introductions on Monday when everybody arrives, because we'll have all the staff there at the visitor center, and we'll hold off on those until then, till we can do kind of a round robin of those, which will be great. So, but yeah, looking forward to seeing everybody on Sunday night. I know, Nancy, you're not going to be attending this one in March, but you're just sitting in to hear some of the history, which is wonderful.
That's right.
So looking forward to all this. So, but well, what I'll do, does anybody, first before I begin, does anybody have any questions about the program? At the end of this, I'll talk a little bit about the schedule and give you some expectations for the week. But does anybody have any burning questions to begin with? No? Okay, cool. Then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and jump in on the Power of Place lecture. And Sarah Lee, did you have anything to add?
No, I just wanted to, greet everybody again. I know we're like doing everything through correspondence, and just to be another friendly face for you all, and a reminder to reach out if you need anything before you get here. And I'm excited to have you all like it's my party. It's Matt's party. And
it's everybody's
so
party.
I'll let him,
I'll let him a lot of folks over on the archaeology team, which makes it great.
So I'm going to bow out, but everybody enjoy.
All right, thanks, Sarah Lee.
Say thank you again.
Cool. Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and share screens at this point, and I will get my PowerPoint up here. Let's see if everybody can see that. And let me move you all over to the other screen. Let's see. There we go. And I'll move you all over here. Otherwise, it's like I'm doing a PowerPoint to no one if I don't have you all on the screen, which is always disturbing. So cool. All right. Well, like I said, what I wanted to do is give a super brief overview. I think most of I think a number of you have been to Montpelier before. And how many of y'all have been to Montpelier? I know Jay, you've been to Montpelier. You've been, all right, yeah. So we've got, I know, Ava, you have not?
No, also we can't see the PowerPoint if you are projecting someone. We can't see it. We just see you right now.
Oh, can other folks see the PowerPoint? Oh, you can't. All right, let me see. Oh, you know what? Why I haven't done that is because I haven't shared screens yet. There you go. Now you should be able to see it.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for pointing that out. That's important. So, yeah, like one thing that we will always encourage folks to do is if something isn't working, do what you just did, Ava, to speak out and say what you need. So we'll get to know each other this week, which would be great. So, but what I want to do is to give a brief overview of some of the history of Montpelier and some of the reasons of why it makes it such an incredible place to not only tell part of American history like with the Constitution, but also just in terms of a place to really excavate and begin to recreate what it looked like in the 1820s. There's so much evidence here for that. So for the site, as most of y'all know, the home of James and Dolly Madison, and but there was over 100 enslaved individuals that lived and worked at Montpelier. And most of the sites that we're looking at really relate to the enslaved community because they were the majority of the folks that were at Montpelier. And so really when you do the archaeology, what you find is, the vast majority of the sites, the vast majority of the artifacts, really the last folks that were holding the artifacts that you're going to be uncovering this next week were members of the enslaved community. So it really, it gives presence to their lives. The archaeology gives presence to their lives that in a lot of ways the history can't, because there's not we don't have a lot of documents on the enslaved community that lived and worked at Montpelier. A lot of this is coming from the archaeology. And for the archaeology, when you all think about plantation sites, and you think about archaeology, what do you all usually what comes to mind if you're thinking about archaeology and doing work at a plantation? And what kind of things do you think you'd find?
Maybe like various tools and things.
Yeah, tools from the work. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Let's. Well, a lot of what we find when we do the archaeology is the most obvious sites are the living spots. So these are the quarters where people are living. Because when you think about where most artifacts are going to be, it's going to be where from sites where people were making a residence for 20 to 30 years and where they're throwing out their ceramics and glasswares. And so really when most archaeologists are working at sites, what tends to get focused on is these living spots. So for example, what you see in the screen right here is the south yard, the quarters for house slaves right beside the main house. We've excavated those sites and have actually recreated them, with reconstructed buildings. And you all are going to be seeing these on the when you come to Montpelier next week. Terry's actually going to be giving you a tour of the south yard almost first thing after you get to the visitor center. And these reconstructions are really an incredible, important part for what we do, because it brings these homes back to life for visitors, so they can understand that the enslaved are here at Montpelier. What we've also got is those quarters that are a little less obvious on the landscape, which are the quarters for the field slaves, which were much less substantial buildings. We've recreated those as well. In fact, the field quarters are just right adjacent to the blacksmith shop where you all are going to be doing excavations next week. And, but what all these sites have in common is there's usually lots and lots of ceramics, glasswares, all kinds of items that, you know, slaves used at their homes. What usually is less obvious, you know, in terms of the archaeology, which just doesn't show up as well, is sites where folks were working, which this includes everything from storage sheds to granaries to, you know, areas in the fields where people are doing work, you know, processing sites, and especially the, you know, the actual fields themselves. So we use a number of different techniques to locate these, which we'll be talking about tonight, predominantly, which is metal detector surveys. And if y'all have looked at had a chance to look at the readings, this is, you know, we've got a number of web pages that talk about how we've used metal detector surveys to locate these sites. And, you know, for the enslaved community, where do you think they'd be spending most of their time?
Working in the fields, maybe?
Yeah, definitely working in the fields. And it's kind of ironic that when you think about, like, how many plantations have you all visited over the years? Like, have you gone to Mount Vernon, Monticello, other places? Which ones have y'all gone to?
I've been to Mount Vernon and Monticello. And, Stratford Hall.
Stratford Hall. Okay. All right. Yeah. And when you were there, what did you usually, you know, what was for the lives of the enslaved, what was the most visible?
Probably what I would remember would be like the homes, but it usually maybe wasn't like, maybe like the main house was usually the focus of like the tours or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely the tours. Yeah, at all these places, usually the main house is, but just representing, you know, the lives of enslaved. You know, a lot of times it is, you know, the residences, and what gets left out, because it's much harder to find, are these work sites, because they're not, you know, if the slave quarters are gone, then a lot of times the tobacco barns, the fields are gone, and that's really, this is where you know, the support for all the infrastructure for not only building places like Montpelier, but also the country in the 19th century was built at these sites. So they're really incredibly important sites that we feel to represent. And the reason why we're so interested in finding these sites and not just focusing on the main house or even just the slave quarters, is this gets into, you know, everything that was happening at these plantations. And this is something that, you know, when we've been working with the descendant community at Montpelier for many, many years. And one thing that these are descendants of slaves at Montpelier who still have a, you know, a very active part of Montpelier. What they've been interested in is recovering, you know, the sites where their ancestors did the work, where they were making the contributions to the economy. And a lot of times, you know, what gets lost is the work that the enslaved community did and what they built, how they built, you know, these plantations. And what slaves get reduced to is their cash value, you know, as people. You know, you talk about Dolly selling the slaves to recover debt. But, one thing that we're very, you know, the community is interested in is recovering the ingenuity of their ancestors, how they contributed to the building of this country. And one thing we're super excited about with the blacksmith shop is that when, you know, the items you're going to be finding this week are, you know, the byproducts of the labor of the enslaved. You know, you're going to be holding items that were made by slaves at that very site. And a lot of times when you're working at these agricultural sites, you know, the barns and things we find, you know, the products of the labor are long gone, but at the blacksmith site, these items will be very, very tangible. So with these sites, you know, again, we're interested, you know, in doing full scale restoration of all the sites. So not just the main house, but, you know, the areas around the main house, the quarters for house slaves, areas where folks are doing work so people can imagine what that work was and what the contributions was. And this a lot of times inspires people to ask more questions. You know, the more they can see of the enslaved community, the more, you know, in depth we're going to be able to get in terms of that interpretation. Whereas if we don't have much there, it's hard to talk to visitors about a lot of this. The other is, with the lack of documentary records, the archaeology is one of the few ways to get at this. So again, this is, you know, a way to recover these lives. And the with the reliance on the archaeological record, this is where we've really, you know, refined our techniques for finding these sites. And for Montpelier, what we're really lucky to have is a site where we've got incredible preservation of the archaeological records. So, you know, from the 1720s through 1844, and I'll get into the time periods here for the Madison ownership and what the enslaved community was doing during these times. But for these over, you know, 120 years, you had close to, at any one time, 100 enslaved individuals living and working at Montpelier. Once Dolly sells Montpelier in 1844, what happens is the plantation goes into decline because, you know, up until the Civil War, there's only about 25 enslaved laborers after the Madisons sell the property. So what was, you know, 5,000 acres of fields gets reduced in size, but also there's just not the same number of people to keep these fields open, and a lot of these return to woods. And then all through the late 19th century, after the Civil War, you know, this decline continues, and a lot of this plantation landscape is abandoned. And it's in the 20th century that there's, you know, the risk of a lot of this being developed. And in the 20th century, and I'll go over these in more detail, these time periods, 20th century is when the DuPonts purchased the home. They buy it in 1902, and they buy it as a country estate. And so they don't need to work the acreage, have their workers work the acreage of Montpelier to make money off the fields or to cut the woods. They're making their money in Delaware. So they keep it as this wooded estate. And so many of these slave communities, the work areas, the living spots are incredibly well preserved, and there for the finding with the archaeology. So today Montpelier consists of around 2,700 acres, and you can see that the area that's in yellow right here is what was the core of the Madison plantation. What's in yellow is what was owned by Montpelier, or what was owned by the Madison family in the 18th and early 19th century. The area that's in white here is what's owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation today. This was given to the trust by the DuPont family, by Marion DuPont Scott, the daughter of William and Annie DuPont, who bought it in 1901. This is the 2,700 acres that was given to the National Trust. So we've got about 4 different plantation sites at Montpelier, but the main one, of course, is that owned by the Madison family, this area in yellow. And what we've been doing through the years is, I'll go into this in more detail, is we've been doing metal detector survey all across the property. The area that's in, you know, green and yellow and red here, these are areas that we've done metal detector survey. And basically what the metal detector survey encompasses is, you know, each of these squares right here, these little squares, like these yellow ones and the red ones, that's about 1/10 of an acre, or about, you know, 20 meters by 20 meters. And I'm gonna, in a couple of slides from here, I'll go into more details of these metal detector surveys, because these are incredibly important for locating the site that we're working on next week. But basically, we're covering all the grounds with these metal detector surveys to locate all the sites. So the visitor core right in here, this is where my arrow is where the main house is. The visitor center is right out in here. And then over in this location is where the blacksmith shop is. And basically wanted to show you this image to show you like how massive Montpelier is and how small the visitor core is. What most visitors experience is just, you know, the main house down to the Madison Family Cemetery down here. And then some people go over to the Gilmore Farm. You all are actually going to be touring a lot of these sites next week. We're going to bring you on a tour of the Gilmore Farm and the Civil War encampments that are up in here. And then also parts of the visitor core that, you know, we use for interpreting the Madison plantation. But there's all these other sites that are out here that, you know, we're just beginning to understand and explore through these metal detector surveys. And for example, you might have seen in some of the reading packet that got sent to you, there is a section on what was called the Eastwoods, or the plantation below the canopy. That area is all right in here. And it's basically, it's a section of the Montpelier plantation that during the Madison era was its own independent farm. Because, you know, with a plantation of about 5,000 acres, it would have been divided into 4 or 5 farms that would have been operated on a separate basis, because, you know, it's about a half a mile to a mile between these areas and the main core of the plantation. So just for proximity, there would be these smaller farms set up at a distance from the main house. So we found this farm complex out here that today is in woods, but has everything from slave quarters to barns, basically what similar to what you all are going to be experiencing this week in the home farm. So Montpelier, you know, we got the visitor core, but we've got all these other sites to look at. And one thing, I don't know, how many of you all are you all leaving on Saturday, or are you all on Friday?
I'm probably going to leave on Friday.
You're leaving on Friday? Well, if anybody's interested, I'm doing a tour at 1 o'clock on Saturday of this Eastwoods area. And that'll be
really?
from 1 o'clock to about 3 o'clock. And you're more than welcome to stay and join for that tour. That'll be a hike out into the Eastwoods. So I wanted to let you all know now so you'd have time to prepare for that. So, but
cool.
For getting into the visitor core, what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this is mainly, you know, the visitor core right in this area. And for the visitor core, what we've got, you know, for the whole site as a whole, we've found close to over 100 historic sites, but most of these sites focus in on this inner plantation area, because that's the area that was really intensively worked all through the 19th century. And I'll get into closer slides of this area. So when you look at, you know, the sites that are in this area, from here on out, what I'm going to be talking about is the visitor core. The earliest site was Mount Pleasant. So Mount Pleasant is the early home of the Madison and the enslaved community. This is where the grandparents initially had the slaves build the first plantation complex. And this is where Frances Madison, the grandmother, she ran the plantation from Mount Pleasant from the 1730s up until her death in 1761. And it was during this time that Montpelier, mainly what she had the slaves growing at Montpelier was mainly tobacco. This is when pretty much Montpelier was a tobacco plantation up until the American Revolution, almost exclusively. And when her son, James Madison Sr., came of age, after his mother's passing away, what he did was he built a much larger brick mansion where the main core of the Montpelier mansion is today. So this is what the Montpelier mansion looked like in the 1760s, shortly after it was built. But for the original home that he and his wife, Nellie Conway Madison, first moved into in 1749, it was actually this building right here. And it's what we've recently discovered, what we call the Planter's Cottage. We just discovered this through archaeology in the South Yard. And Terry will be talking more about this. But this building, originally we thought was a kitchen. It was a 16 by 20 brick foundation. But when we were doing the excavations back in 2016, we found the chimney had fallen over and had collapsed right beside the main building. And as it turns out, this chimney, when you look at this shot right here, this is actually the top of the chimney base. And when the architects looked at this, they were able to figure out that this chimney didn't really match what would be on a kitchen. It was more like what you would term a planter's cottage. Or this is the first home that oftentimes owners would build before the main house was built. And so we're able to figure out that this kitchen was used as the planter's cottage during James Madison's childhood, from the 1750s up until 1765, when the main house was built. So this has really helped us evolve our thinking about the plantation. Again, all this is found in the archaeology. So with the planter's cottage, it was used as the family home up until about 1765. Then the main house is built, and it's after, during up until the American Revolution that the building was this brick building that ran between these two chimneys. And then when Dolly and James are married in 1797, they arranged for this duplex addition to be added on to the north. And so essentially that's when they arranged to have the portico added onto the front. And they run this as basically two different households. Their household with Dolly Payne Todd's son from her first marriage, John Payne Todd. Dolly was married in the early 1790s or 1780s, and then with the yellow fever outbreak in 1792, her first husband passed away, and then about 5 years after that, she met James Madison Jr. and they became married. This is when he was serving in the Philadelphia legislature in the 1790s. And in 1797, they decide they were going to retire from, because he's finished up his term in the legislature, and they retire back to Montpelier. But of course, they couldn't predict that in 1801 that James Madison's good friend Thomas Jefferson would ask him to be Secretary of State. And then he's Secretary of State for 2 terms under Jefferson. And then he's elected president in 1808 and serves 2 terms. So this retirement that they have in 1797 is very short stayed, and they spend 16 years in Washington. And what they arrange for during this time when they're in DC is they start making plans for making the house become much larger. And this is after James Madison's father passes away in 1801. So they change this Georgian style house into this neoclassical home with, the wings that are on the side. They redo all the grounds of the house, have the slaves redo the grounds, where they get rid of the buildings that were out front. So if you look at this image right here, and these of course are all 3D reconstructions we've done in the computer, they get rid of these buildings out front, but keep these buildings to form the core of the south yard. The original planter's cottage, and this other building here, which was called the spinning house. But what they do is they add the 2 smokehouses, the 2 duplexes, get rid of the buildings out front, and have this planted line of pine trees planted that leads down to a decorative temple where the blacksmith shop used to be in the 18th century. So with all these changes, what they arrange for is this house that's basically this entertainment complex where they entertain, all these dignitaries that are traveling through the area in the 1820s and 1830s. And it's during this time that there's all kinds of documents written about Montpelier. It's where really one of the time periods that's best documented for Montpelier, because you have all these people visiting that are members of the elite. They're literate, they're recording, conversations they have with the Madisons, but at the same time, they're describing what they see. They're describing the drawing room, they're describing the temple, all this landscape from the 1820s that then, begins to change after Dolly Madison sells the property in 1844. And on Monday, Sarah Lee is going to be giving you all a tour in the afternoon of the house, and she'll be talking a lot about the changing landscape of the surrounding grounds. But what happens in 1844 is this is when Dolly sells the property, and how this evolves is James Madison dies in 1836, and when he passes away in 1836, basically this is when Dolly Madison comes to understand what incredible debt Montpelier's in. And so what she does is she starts selling off slaves in the mid, shortly after James Madison dies, and she moves to Washington, D.C. by 1837. And so between 1837 and 1844, Dolly sells off about 2/3 of the slaves. And then finally in 1844, with the debtors knocking on the door of Montpelier, she finally sells all of Montpelier. And so really, in some ways, the legacy that Madison leaves his wife, Dolly, isn't, a functioning plantation. he's leaving her, you know, the human capital that he knows she'll sell to pay off the debts that the estate is encumbered with. So, you know, really, you know, when you get into this, you know, when Madison is in his retirement years and he's receiving all these dignitaries like the Marquis de Lafayette, there, you know, some folks are talking with him about why he doesn't make more efforts to end slavery. And for him, you know, he puts it on a very political basis. He says that, you know, if you end slavery, you're basically going to cause the country to be divided, that the country can't survive without slavery. And in a lot of ways, he's also reflecting on his own fortune, because he knows that he tried to free his slaves. Basically, the folks he owed debt to would be coming to collect all those debts. I mean, it's like, you know, if we had a bunch of you know, we bought a you know, a $80,000 Mercedes, and then we took out a loan for that, and then we decided to give that car to NPR, and then we called the bank and said, oh, I gave that car to NPR, I don't owe you debt anymore. The bank is going to be like, no, you still owe money on the car. It's not our problem. You gave your car away. Same thing with Madison and his slaves. So really, he has a, you know, a vested interest in maintaining slavery for the political fortune of the country, but then also for his own personal sake. He has a deep stake in it. So, you know, being able to tell this story about Madison really helps people understand, visitors understand the importance that, you know, of slavery with the Constitution and with the economy, but then also who Madison was as a slave owner and how his own fortune was tied to slavery, which means that, you know, he was very committed to slavery himself. And this makes, you know, all this interpretation we're doing in slavery and talking about, you know, the lives of the enslaved, that in another way, you know, much more relevant to the history of the country for visitors, especially. So with Dolly selling the property in 1844, she sells everything, the furniture, the enslaved community gets divided and sold. And this is really in many ways the worst nightmare for a community like Montpelier. I mean, you know, anyone who was enslaved knew that when the owner died, that's when the debts would come, you know, to bear. And that's when a lot of times people would be sold to the Deep South. And what do you all know about, you know, slavery in the 1820s and 30s for the U.S.? Where was most slavery occurring in the U.S.?
It was a transition into the Deep South.
Yeah, it was. And what was being grown in the Deep South?
Cotton.
Yeah, cotton is what, you know, when you think of these plantations in the Deep South, you know, these classic column plantations, these are all these cotton plantations where, you know, the owners are, you know, the gross domestic product for this country in the 1830s and 40s, 90% of it is from slavery and from cotton. And it's what allows the US to become a global economic power. So with the sale of Montpelier in 1844, almost all the slaves get sold to the Deep South. And it's only after emancipation in the 1860s that many folks come back to the Virginia area, the central Virginia area, trying to find family and, you know, going back to make connections with folks they knew in the 1840s. So it's, you know, all this would have been, you know, very, not only known by the Madisons, but also by the enslaved themselves. They would have, you know, had family that would have been sold by this time. So all this means that for Montpelier, by the time you get to 1848, basically the only buildings that, you know, are left by even 5 to 10 years after Dolly sells the property is the main house and the temple. All the other buildings, like for example, in the South Yard, the area where we're digging next week where the blacksmith shop is to the south of here, and I'll show the slide of that next, all these buildings are sold or either taken down or left to decay in place. And what's left is the archaeological record of these. And what happens, you know, after this is the main core of the plantation, which is where the visitor core today is, the main farm complex gets switched over to the north side of the property where the archaeology lab is today. And so all this area is pretty much abandoned except for the main house. And really the most intense occupation that happens after, you know, the 1850s is the Civil War. And this is where you get, you know, close to 1,200 troops, Confederate troops occupying Montpelier. And this is between the Battle of Gettysburg and the Wilderness Campaign. And we're going to be bringing out to some of the camps that were in the northern part of the property, where we've actually rebuilt some of the encampments there to really focus on what the legacy of the Constitution was, which was the Civil War. So on Wednesday, we're going to be giving you all a tour of the Civil War camps and talking about the significance of that with Montpelier and the Constitution. And of course, what happens after, you know, the end of the Civil War in terms of African Americans? And I'll get my tea while you all, like 1865, what 3 amendments are passed? 13th, 14th, and 15th, but what do they have to deal with?
Emancipation?
Yeah, emancipation. Yeah, making slavery illegal, giving citizenship to African Americans, and then also giving African Americans the right to vote. And you know, during this time period, Montpelier is going through changes. It you know, gets changed into there's renovations that happen to the house, but also what happens on the landscape is there's a number of freedmen's farms that were free blacks buy, you know, 5 to 10 acres of land at Montpelier. And the site that we're, you know, really focused on is the Gilmore Farm. This is a shot of the Gilmore Farm taken around 1910. And it's here that you can really, you know, document, you know, what happens with African Americans. There's the hope for, you know, freedom and being able to buy land. But then, of course, Jim Crow occurs, you know, by the 1880s. And you have this complete repression of Black Americans during this time period. And all this, you know, is part of this constitutional story. It's but, you know, the balance of power between state and federal powers that decides that states can make the decision about segregation. And it's not until the civil rights legislation of the 1960s that it's mandated nationally. And, you know, like the National Guard gets called out to desegregate schools in Georgia. So, you know, all this has to do with, you know, our man, James Madison. You know, that legacy is there and it continues up to today. And when you get into the 20th century, this is when the DuPonts owned the property. And like I mentioned, this is when they changed this into more of a country estate. They run it, you know, they triple the size of the main house. This is a shot of what Montpelier looked like around 1901. And 4 years later, this is the same building, you know, looking at the back. These columns right here are the rear colonnade. They're almost sucked into all these additions that the DuPonts had. And what's really kind of wild is these DuPont additions literally envelop all these original, all this Madison fabric. So in the same way, you know, what the DuPonts do is while they make some really radical changes to the main house, they make very little changes to the grounds. I mean, anywhere around the main house, you dig down 3 or 4 inches, you're at this 1840s surface where, you know, all the archaeological evidence for the outbuildings, the fence lines are all there to locate. And I'll show that in a few seconds. But with the main house, what happens with the main house is when the Montpelier Foundation is created in 2002, we get a gift from the Mellon family to remove the DuPont additions. And you might think, you know, Mellon's paying for the DuPont removal of the DuPont additions. This was something not lost by the Mellon family. They wanted to make sure that the DuPonts were okay with this. So there's a 18-month process of litigation with the DuPont family to make sure this was all right. We actually, at the visitor center, we added on, we have these DuPont galleries where we actually moved rooms from the DuPont mansion over to the visitor center that you can see next week. But what we did from 2003 to about 2008 is do this very careful restoration of the main house where, you know, with removing the DuPont additions, we found all this Madison fabric in the building. And by the end, what we're able to do is restore the main house based on the physical evidence we found through this architectural investigations. And actually right now we got a grant from the Institute for Museum Library Services to digitally document all these changes. And if you all got the newsletter, Sarah Lee sent that out last night. That we've got a website that begins where you can start to explore this. And if you didn't get the newsletter, let me know and I'll send that to you. Give me a shout out on that and I can send that link to you. So what we did with around the main house though, is we decided, use the same concept of using the physical information, the physical evidence that's in the ground instead of the house to continue the restoration to the grounds. And one of the first things that we did is we did investigations in the front yard where we had this watercolor from the 18 teens showing this front fence. And we went out and did archaeology and found the fence post holes. And these are actual, we found the post holes that matched up where the fence line was. And we used this physical evidence to actually reconstruct what this front landscape looked like. And with the archaeology, not only did we find the fence holes, but we literally found the last set of wagon ruts that were left in place in the 1840s. And when the next owners, changed the main house, they lowered the grade in front of the house and covered over this whole road with about a foot of clay. And that really left these wagon ruts basically fossilized in place. So we used all this evidence to actually restore what the main house looked like by 2008. And yeah, I'll go ahead and send you, I'll see you all send it out. I'll send you send that out tonight to you all. So, so what we used is the archaeological evidence to get this, figure out what the front fence looked like and actually restore it. So when we opened the main house, the landscape began to match, the restoration of the house. And with this, what we started to do is to really take an intensive look at the grounds. This is a computer generated rendering of the main house as it would have appeared in the 1820s. And what we've done is the archaeology on this front fence revealed that, but then we also realized that the temple was another building that that needed to be investigated. We've restored that since 2008. This garden feature that's over here, which today is the Boxwood Grotto, it's a symmetrical twin to the temple in relationship to the front door of the house. And then you've got this layout of plantings that kind of direct the eye to the main house. And so we've done archaeology on all these spaces, to find the planting holes for the pine alley, the planting holes for the grove, to restore this landscape back. And in addition to that, we found, other items such as a trash deposit that related to the dining room from the 1820s, where we found all these Parisian porcelains. And in addition, these transferware prints that basically this bamboo and peony transfer print shows up everywhere across the property and is a really what's called, archaeologists call a horizon marker for being able to date sites to the retirement period. And so what we've basically been doing, over the past, 2 decades is going place to place, really figuring out what these areas looked like, both through the documentary records and the archaeology, and then figuring out what parts of this really need restoration to tell the story that has the most impact on the landscape. And one of those stories that has the most impact is the area of the South Yard right here, these quarters for house slaves. And this is one of the first areas that we were able to identify through documents. One of the few surviving documents was this insurance map from 1848 that shows these outbuildings in the South Yard. And when we did the archaeology in this space, what we discovered were these incredibly well-preserved footprints of buildings. And we used that archaeological evidence first to outline what these buildings looked like. And then that inspired a donor to actually give us the money, David Rubenstein, to actually finish the archaeology of the smokehouses, which we did in 2017. We found the evidence for these smokehouses, and then finally do the archaeology of what we thought was just the kitchen and the spinning house to be able to really figure out what this area looked like and begin to restore it. And Terry's going to be bringing you through this area on Monday morning. But an important part of this process was involving the descendant community on the excavations and on the research. And one thing that in working with the descendant community, these are descendants of the slaves of Montpelier, what they were very concerned with is, how once their ancestors' homes were restored, how they'd be represented to the public. And what they requested is the same degree of sanctity that visitors experience when they walk through the main house be used for the visitor experience and ethos in their ancestors' homes. And so what we did is we worked with the descendant community on creating an exhibit that really ties these restored buildings to the story of James Madison and the Constitution. And the exhibit is called Mere Distinction of Color, and it links the ties between the Constitution, slavery, and race, and shows how, in many ways, what the Constitution defends is slavery, because that was the economy of the time period, but then how slavery was based on race. And so what we've done is given visitors a way to understand, what enslaved Americans' role, why there were enslaved Americans at a place like Montpelier, and what their role was in creating this country, not only in terms of doing the labor, but the problems that were created by preserving slavery in the Constitution and indoctrinating this race-based hierarchy, this caste system that we have in our country, really led to, it took 100 years later, 200 years later to have these changes happen, but resulted in a document that really began to unpack these through, say, the civil rights legislation and the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments, and making those work. And so really, the only way to understand the race issues we have today is by looking at the Constitution in light of slavery. And, there's really no better place to do this than at Montpelier, where it's James Madison's home, where his role as a slave owner influenced his design with the Constitution. And that's where it's incredibly important to have these spaces be present. And one of the areas that we're working on next that, involves you all next week is this larger farm complex. So here's the visitor center. This is where we're going to meet on Monday morning. Is we're going to do do introductions. We're going to have dinner at Arlington House on Sunday night, but then the next morning meet at the visitor center. And Terry's going to bring you over to the South Yard to talk more about a lot of what I've just introduced you all to tonight. But where we're going to be working next week is this grassy area that appears to be this peaceful, bucolic scene today, which back in the day, based on surveys we've done, was this massive work complex that consisted of slave quarters, work sheds, tobacco barns, the overseer's house that we just excavated last year, and then the blacksmith shop, which is going to be the focus of the excavations next week. And I cannot tell you how excited we are about next week. This is the first set of units we have ever opened up on a blacksmith shop at Montpelier. And for me, I've been wanting to excavate a blacksmith shop for the last 30 to 35 years of my professional career. So really getting into this is going to be exciting. And you'll see why in a couple of seconds. But how we've found a lot of these sites is through standard archaeological techniques. So, with the units we've excavated, that's about, it's been about 10 years since we excavated the field slave quarters. And these are where we found all these ceramics and subfloor pits out in these locations, how we identified these buildings. Most of the buildings out here, though, including the blacksmith shop, were only identified through metal detector surveys. And the three buildings right here, the tobacco threshing barn, the work shed, and the stable, Terry will talk to you more about these on Monday. These only were able to be identified through metal detector surveys. And this is really because they had such a light scatter of artifacts, on the landscape. And when you look at, how these metal detector surveys work, this again is all of the Montpelier property here in red. The areas in green are what we've done metal detector survey on. And how we conduct the metal detector surveys is we basically have metal detectorists sweep each 20 meter by 20 meter square, looking for any evidence of artifacts. When they find metallic signals, they sample them to make sure it's not modern debris that's out there. And where we find historic nails, which is most of the artifacts we find, that's when they do the actual artifact counts. So while, say, for example, in this area right in here, there's actually a lot of modern trash deposits in here, dating to the 20th century. We record those, but what gets recorded on these hit counts, this heat map, are the sites relating to the period of slavery. So these areas in red are areas where we've got sites that we want to go back and investigate. And so going back, first, what the real benefit of nails is, and you all will learn about this next week on Monday with Mary, is nails not only give us a location of the building, but also during the period of the Madison ownership of Montpelier, they change manufacture about 3 different times. And these different changes in manufacture actually correspond to not only changes in what generation owned Montpelier, but also how Montpelier is being operated. So, for example, when we find these machine made nails that you'll find a lot of next week, that's the period of the retirement years. So when we find a collection of these machine cut nails out in the woods, we actually know the site dates to the retirement years. Whereas if we find a site that has all wrought nails, these handmade nails, we know it dates to the parents' generation, James Madison Sr. and his wife Nellie Conway Madison, in the enslaved community from that time period. So the nails provide us with all kinds of information, and even for the post-Madison era, there's a different type of nail that allows us to understand the post-Madison time period. So if you focus in on this white area right here, this is the blow up of the area where we're going to be working next week. Here's the main house, the visitor center, the blacksmith shop is right in this area. And you can see where all these red concentrations are. This is where there's lots and lots of sites that we're locating. And so what we do once we find these sites with the 20-meter surveys is we go in, not only, again, we're able to date the sites from the different nail types that are there. So for example, where this area is right here, we found almost all wrought nails, which dated it to the mid-18th century. One of the next later dating sites is the tobacco barn that had some of these nails dating to the 1790s. And then the rest of these sites all date to the 18 teens and 20s, to the retirement period. And so these are, sites that we're really interested in, doing investigations on. We're going to be doing this over the next 5 years to actually reconstruct these buildings and bring them back to life for visitors. And so once we find the sites, what we do is we go from a 20-meter grid. You can see right here, this is the surveys we're doing at the overseer's house. The Madison Family Cemetery right here is in the background right here. As we go from a 20-meter grid down to a 10-foot grid. And with that 10-foot grid, what we're able to do is get a much better resolution on where the buildings are. So for example, this is a 20-meter grid right here. When we lay out the 10-foot grid, all of a sudden, it's like you go from, an old style computer that's very pixelated to a modern one where you get a much finer grain resolution. And all of a sudden, the overseer's house looks huge right here, but when you do the 10-foot grid and you start doing these counts on a finer basis, all of a sudden you can see this concentration right here. That's where the building is. And other sites like the tobacco barn, this is where that building turned out to be. Down here at the field quarter, these red dots are where the buildings turned out to be that we, later on did excavations. And you notice the blacksmith shop that's right here, this area, we just finished up some of the surveys there. And I've got this on a web map that is right, let's see, is this it? it's being hidden right here. This computer is being very naughty. There we go. This one right here, this shows our most recent surveys we've done at the blacksmith shop. So again, here's the visitor center. The main house is right up here. The overseer's house that we excavated last year is right here. Here's the Madison Family Cemetery. And then the blacksmith shop, which you can see right here, this is where we have found, literally, in these areas, hundreds and hundreds of metallic signals that basically are so dense that in this area right here, when Dennis was doing the metal detector survey, the hits were so close together, the machine wouldn't differentiate from one hit to the other. And so he just said, this 10-foot grid has like hundreds of artifacts in it. Just put a unit here and you'll be in like Flynn. So we're going to be putting in units across this area. But this map right here, I'll send you all a copy of this. It's got all the MDS hits. And what we're able to do with this information is you can actually click on these hits and it shows, what was found. So for example, in this square right here, we found, what horseshoe nails, some clipped iron. Every one of these dots are areas that Dennis sampled. And you've got just, some amazing, concentrations of artifacts. So for example, in this little divot right here, that's about less than maybe 6 inches in diameter, he uncovered, all these horseshoe nails, slag parts, which is a byproduct of blacksmithing, clipped iron, just all kinds of artifacts. And when you go back to this PowerPoint right here, you can see, where some of these hits right here, this is what it looks like when Dennis is doing the metal detector survey. The blue flags are the 10-foot grid. And then this is the area, these red hits are all the hits he's marked. And then he samples 3 hits in these areas. And basically, this is one hit that we excavated back in November. Just hundreds of artifacts per, square. And so in a 5-foot unit, we're going to be uncovering, all this evidence from the blacksmith shop, which, not only are we hoping to find these artifacts, but then also recover where the actual buildings are. So where the forge is located, where the storage buildings are, because the blacksmith shop would have a whole complex of buildings that's associated with it. And actually, we recently did a ground penetrating radar survey of this area, and part of what we're going to be sampling next week is units where the ground penetrating radar survey indicated there are anomalies, which are subsurface disturbances or something interesting in the ground. So these units will be exploring that. And just to give you an idea of, what this area will look like by the end of the season, this is a shot of the overseer's house right here that we excavated last year. The blacksmith shop is right across the road. So you can see all the flags that Dennis was sampling here. Visitor center is up here. This is the field quarters that we excavated back in 2012. We're going to be working at the blacksmith shop. But like I mentioned during the COVID talk about 2 weeks ago, we're going to have the units spread out, to provide social distancing. But this also is very beneficial for, exploring a large area, because we want to, explore a lot of the areas that Dennis has found through the metal detector surveys. And what these units you're going to be in are going to look like are these 5-foot by 5-foot units. And we're probably going to end up going to about this depth right here, not very deep in the ground. You get down to about 1 foot in the ground and you're at this red clay subsoil that basically, that's where all the artifacts end. And so wanted to give you a picture, of what to expect next week in terms of what the digging is going to be. And this is where, we've got tents that will protect you from the sun, but in the morning, just looking at the weather just a second ago, it'll probably be about like maybe 40 degrees in the morning, but it'll warm up to about 60 in the afternoon. So definitely dressing in layers is an absolute must. And if you have a favorite knee pad, go ahead and bring it. We do have knee pads, but a lot of them are, pretty squished and shot. So if you have something, you know, for knee protection, it's good to bring a knee pad. You'll be doing a lot of screening. So bringing gloves is good just to protect your hands, and also helps you, you know, keep a little bit warmer. But wanted to give you all an idea of, you know, what the site would be. And we're going to go into a lot more detail next week of, you know, what the metal detector survey, what that entailed. Dennis will be out there metal detecting while you're out there. So you'll be able to see how the metal detector works and what kind of hits he's uncovering. But of course, you're going to be digging the hits up in the unit, so you'll be able to experience what these what the hits actually are. So and for the schedule, just to go over that real quick, we'll get you this next week. And I just hit the wrong key. Let's see. Yeah, this one right here. The schedule. We're gonna, and sorry to blind you with the bright light here. We're gonna do introductions on Monday. Probably most of Monday morning is gonna be doing tours and then introduction to artifacts. And then by the afternoon, you'll be digging. So yeah, and then for the rest of the week, you'll have a tour in the morning, but then doing excavations in the morning and the afternoon. And then on Friday, you'll do a field lab. And like I mentioned, get dark here in Virginia. Turn on the light. I'll stop the screen share. On Friday, what we'll do is on Friday we'll have you all in the field lab washing your finds for the week. But then also we'll do a closing reception on Friday afternoon about 3 o'clock. And we'll kind of do a recap of the week and, you know, get feedback from you all about what your all's experience was. So, but does anybody have any questions or, you know, about, you know, what happens next week or anything about the whirlwind tour? I just gave you the history of Montpelier. Now I'm gonna grab some tea because I've been talking way too much. So.
Well, I just want to say I'm jealous. And I wish I was going to be there, but I'll be there next time.
Yeah, Nancy, I hope you can come out in either April or May. That'd be great to have you.
Can we get a copy of that schedule emailed to us or something?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and send that to you. I get the Sarah Lee just sent the email. I will send this schedule along with a copy of the most recent newsletter.
I don't think we got the maps either. She mentioned something about maps on how to get everywhere. We haven't gotten any of that.
Okay. All right. I will talk to Sarah Lee about that. Sir, you have not received that. I'll just have her send the maps out to everybody again. So, and the maps are basically, how to get to Arlington House for Sunday. And did you all get any of the an introductory packet for what to bring, like what types of clothing to bring and what to expect?
We got an email and it was very, very brief. Gloves, sunscreen, hat. That was about it. Okay, wow. All right. I will make, because when I was talking about the readings, I noticed y'all were kind of looking at each other like, what reading? So I'll make sure you all get that. This is why it's good to do this on Tuesday instead of like on Thursday when you're getting ready to leave. So yes. I'll make sure you all I'll get that. What I'll do is I'll dig into the I've got access to the Dig Montpelier email account, and I'll just find this and send it to you all. So okay, thank you. Thanks. You all got the link for this tonight, so I've got your all's email. So, but I'll just send everything out again. So sorry about that. But yeah, with COVID, it's been nice to be able to do these Zoom sessions in advance of everybody coming, because it's my greatest fear is that we do an expedition program and people don't have the right information and they don't end up in the right place. So, but well, cool. Well, any other comments? Or Jay, do you have any suggestions? Are you still there, Jay?
Yes, I am.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Our electricity has been off, so I'm on a phone call only.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for listening, Jay. You didn't see much of anything at all. So, the screen was very tiny.
I saw it all before, so I was mentally picturing everything you had said.
Okay. All right. Glad for that, Jay. Sorry your electricity is out. Did y'all have a storm there?
No, it was a planned shutdown, and it was supposed to be just until 4 p.m. But it's past 4 p.m.
That's not good. You're in the wilds of the DC area, so who knows what'll happen there.
Yeah, we're in the wilds of Maryland. Yeah.
Wilds of Maryland. Yep. So.
Yes,
well,
yes.
really,
Once again, it's for everybody. This is going to be such an excellent week. You guys are going to be just thrilled by everything that you get a chance to do and see. So I'm looking forward to it. This is my 4th time, and I'm just as excited about this one as I was the first one.
Well, thank you, Jay. We don't pay Jay to say these things, I swear. So
nope.
y'all meet Jay in person on Sunday. So yeah, so looking forward to seeing you all on Sunday night. And if you all have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out either to Sarah Lee or myself. You should, I'll make sure in the email that I send you all just in a few minutes that I'll put in my cell phone number as well. So if you're, somewhere in Virginia on Sunday afternoon and have no idea where Montpelier is, make sure you get guided into the home port. So, but, well, great. Well, looking forward to seeing you all. And again, any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We're, having having folks come prepared it makes it a really great experience for everybody, including us. So, but well, stay safe in the meantime, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on Sunday afternoon.
All right. So, thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.